So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming in to this BBC seminar. I'd like to give a warm welcome to Adam Coscia, who is actually a colleague of mine from the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory. We were in the same group over there. He's a PhD candidate in human-centered computing at Georgia Tech's Visual Analytics Lab, advised by Alex Endert. Adam's research sits at the intersection of visual analytics, HCI, and AI, focusing on how LLMs can power transparent, human-in-the-loop analysis. His work includes collaborations with the MIT Lincoln Laboratory, Adobe Research, and NASA JPL. With multiple awards, he's done a great job and publications on the way. So today he'll share integrating AI into visual analytics, including demos of VisPile and Debrief. So please, can we all give a warm welcome to Adam Coscia?
All right. Hi, everybody in the room. Thanks for making your way in person. For those online, thank you very much for joining us today over on Zoom and on YouTube. As Brandon said, my name's Adam Coscia. Final year of the PhD at Georgia Tech in human-centered computing. It's been a long journey, and now I'm getting the exciting opportunity to come talk with a lot of y'all about what I've been working on, things on integrating AI technologies into this thing called visual analytics. So we're going to chat today and hopefully do some live demos where I'll show you these tools in action and hopefully spark some interest and excitement on this area. So first, I realize not everyone might know what visual analytics is. So what is my core research? It's about building data analysis tools like a Tableau or like Power BI, with languages like JavaScript and doing it in the browser with libraries like D3.js. And the goal of these tools is to help people to visualize, interact with, and understand their data, like text data, time series, and tabular data sets. So what does one of these visual analytics tools look like in practice? One of my absolute favorite analysis tools I've built was at an internship at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And we built a visualization tool for these deep ocean researchers at Caltech. So the researchers would go out in the ocean, they would drive these robotic submersibles down to the seafloor, and then they would collect mud samples. And so the goal of the tool we built was to then take these massive Excel spreadsheets of data that was generated from analyzing the mud. Then we wanted to plot them on a map and in 3D so the team could then make data-driven decisions about where to dive next. And so to test this, we actually managed to put it on a boat 3 separate times. And they took it out in the ocean and on the fly would upload data that they collected about the mud samples, visualize it, and then say, wow, the data doesn't look like what we were expecting. We should actually go over here or drive the submersible there. And that saved them a lot of extra time and money, which was very, very valuable for these scientists. And so DeepSea is a very classic example of a visual analytics tool, which exhibits many well-known pros and cons of human-driven analysis. So we're going to start today by focusing on where humans sit in the analysis loop. So humans are uniquely good at leveraging their intuition and domain expertise to find patterns that algorithms can sometimes miss. When you see a visual, you can say, wow, that pattern is immediately obvious. That may not be obvious to a machine. But that does make us pretty slow at needing to interpret the viz and prone to biases and judgment errors. I mean, you often hear things like, well, the visuals deceived me, or I see a pattern, but the other person doesn't, right? Well, today, we're seeing a lot more people using AI to interact with the same sorts of data, text and time series, tabular data. And companies are embedding these LLMs into chat UIs that can extract information, generate charts, and synthesize these insights all automatically and for us. So seeing this trend and being a visual analytics guy, I got curious. How are people using AI to interact with their data? So in this very broad space, one area I've been starting with is human AI collaboration. And since linear chat UIs are simply just the dominant way that people interact with LLMs, we wanted to know if we could use something like visualizations to help users to manage things like cognitive overload when chatting and working with an AI partner. So at Adobe, we designed a chat UI with a goal tracking pipeline and visualizations called OnGoal. And so as users chat, OnGo will track what goals you're working on. It will evaluate them and explain them through visual highlighting of examples in the chat that shows this goal is being addressed, this sentence is going against your goal, and then we'll have visual overviews that will show which goals are changing and merging over time in sort of like node link diagram there. And we were able to test it in tools like Adobe Acrobat to see how users were able to keep track of analyzing documents as they were going. And it was really helpful for people to mitigate communication issues and avoid people having to restart their chat when things derailed. So if we step back and we think about visual analytics and analyzing data and this emerging space of collaborating with AI and interacting with it, I think it's clear that AI could meaningfully change some of the ways that we interact with our data in visual analytics tools. But how should we do it? Once I started poking at this, a number of these questions started to fall out. And the two that I really want to focus on today focus on agency, when humans and machines should act and when they shouldn't, and communication, how do we know the AI and the human are talking about the same thing? And a vision of what would an AI-infused deep sea look like, or Tableau or Excel. And so to better understand the trade-offs of agency and communication during data analysis, I've been developing this preliminary model of interaction as a spectrum of these human-machine tools, from tools that fully automate analysis to ones that keep humans in the driver's seat of doing analysis. So on the side of machines, you typically have the benefits of a more controlled, repeatable, robust algorithm. Those are gains that people are actively trying to get because algorithms are very good at that. We can concretely define parameters. But that control can also make machine-driven solutions rigid, hard to adapt, opaque, especially in the era of deep learning. And they lack accountability many times if these opaque machine learning models get something wrong. But on the other side, you have human-driven analysis. And so these are those classic strengths I mentioned. Humans are able to make judgments, apply their domain expertise, be creative and adaptable when they see things they didn't expect. And then also, we may not be the best at it, but we can explain ourselves and say why we did what we did. And yet that makes us really fickle, and there's usually disagreement between humans. We can be very slow, and it can be hard to replicate exactly what our process was. So what would a best of both worlds then look like, given those benefits and drawbacks? Well, I think it should take the best parts of the human and machine-driven analysis. I think the machine should be focused on speeding up time-consuming tasks and guiding the human to relevant data for them to review, while the human can adapt to that data and make their human judgments, and then hopefully tell the machine where to look next. But if we do realize a vision like that, there are still a number of issues that immediately pop up that are the ones I think I want to address today. When should the human act on information, and then when should the machine? What insights came from the human, and then which came from the machine? And how can the human and the machine communicate with one another and share their findings? This is where I believe we should address these issues of agency and communication in realizing human AI collaborative tools. And so clearly, if humans and AI both bring necessary skills to the table, I think the question is, how should we integrate AI into visual analytics? And today, we're going to show off some live demo research prototypes of two tools, each that focus on addressing these different challenges in communication and agency. And first up, we're going to talk about enabling bidirectional communication between humans and AI by demonstrating one of my most recent tools that I built called the Debrief tool. So this was an internship project that I did at MIT's Lincoln Laboratory. And our goal was to see if we could enable users to bidirectionally control, update, and explain a visualization dashboard using an LLM. So the setup for the problem was actually really simple. We were studying how people review human-machine teaming scenarios in Minecraft, very common and popular test bed to test out autonomous robotics and collaborative operations in a virtual environment, so that we don't have to go build it. And we can see how different robots perform and how humans work with them. Because the task was for having one human and one robot build a house together in Minecraft. Then they would have the human that was working with the robot review their own gameplay and the data that they generated. So the human had to answer questions like, where did the robot do? What did they do? What were the pain points in collaborating? And why did the robot do what it did? And so my team at Lincoln Lab were working on a really cool tool when I got there to figure out how AI might help humans to perform that task of review better. And then this really cool tool where you had these video views of the gameplay that was going on, and then a chat panel that would have access to the data that was logged, the locations and what the robot and the human were collecting and doing. And you could ask questions like, what was the robot doing at a certain time? Or what would the robot have needed to do to accomplish a certain task? And an LLM would be down there to fetch the data, to analyze it and return natural language explanations. And you could watch the videos to get the ground truth to see, is that actually what's happening? So it was a first pass at figuring out, where do we put AI and LLMs into this mix? But after testing that first version, we had a number of open questions about this LLM-driven sort of analysis. How would you validate those LLM responses? When they get generated, you have no idea if they're being correct. You have to scrub through the videos. You have to watch a lot to say, okay, well, is it actually true? And then if you're reading the LLM's response, what about data around that? I asked about a certain time, but maybe context could provide more explainability over what the LLM's saying. And then what about contextual input for the user? What if I just want to point to something in the video or to say this or to that and to give context clues for the LLM to guide on what to answer about? And so a number of these questions, I think, are driving us towards realizing how we might help users and LLMs communicate during visual data analysis. And the solution led us to build the Debrief tool. And it's a visualization dashboard with an LLM chat interface for answering questions about this human-machine teaming. And so now we are going to switch over to another view here, duplicate my screen so we can see it. And I will share the screen that I'm showing here to show you Debrief tool. So this is a visualization dashboard that we built for the human machine teaming data. And the initial thing to show is that it is just a dashboard here, which was really cool. They didn't have this capability before. So I'll hit play here to show the main control being updating multi-view visualizations. So the data that was collected were where the human and the robot were up in the spatial view, what they were interacting and collecting with, the action view showing what actions they were taking as a strip plot over time. And then for the robot, the scientists at the Lincoln Lab had developed this autonomous agent with a predefined model. It was a binary decision tree. And so they could concretely define what the robot was observing in its environment. And then based on binary decisions, like, is the human near the house? Is the human mining? Do I have enough resources? Yes or no? It would lead down a branching path towards take this action. And then having video feeds of what the human and the robot were doing. And so it's a dashboard. You can make it faster and slower. You can scrub through time. You can change the views and filter and drag them around. But the really cool bit was when we went back to that initial demo I showed of putting the LLM into this. How can we ask questions about this dashboard and integrate a more chat experience and work with the AI? So I'm gonna ask a question here. What if I wanna just understand a summary? Please summarize what was happening between minutes 2 and 4. Now, these questions I'm going to be showing you guys came from user-driven research that we did with the folks that would actually use a tool like this. They're called operators. And so they do the review part of having to look at the data. So we worked with them to understand what questions they wanted to be able to ask of the data. And then we tried to support that with one of the best designed views we can have, as well as answers that hopefully align with what they're expecting to read. And so the LLM went back, fetched that data, and then generate an interesting response, which is really, really cool. But I'm reading that, right? They're chopping wood and the robot's doing stuff, but can I just see what the LLM is saying there? And you can. And we developed the capability to immediately annotate the visualizations with the data that was returned that was used to generate the LLM's response and annotate it directly on screen, thereby providing an immediate visual feedback and explainability over what the LLM is responding to. And we designed these annotations for each of these views specifically. So a question like summarize what was happening, that requires multiple data points to be able to explain. In this scenario, where they are, what they're acting on, what they're collecting, what the decisions were. And so it shows a multi-view approach to this annotation where we can immediately highlight on the spatial view, where were the human and the robot in that time period with the red highlighting, or which of the actions did they take and then which ones did they not, like collecting stone and crafting sticks. They didn't do those. And then what the change in inventory was for these operators, and which of the paths you should be taking in the decision tree, labeled with a sort of dashed line of like green, is that the right path? Was that the wrong path? And we can still continue to update and operate on this dashboard. So as I scrub through here, the annotations persist because this is explaining the answer that we've asked for explanations over right now. But if I move out of this region, they're no longer there. And so it's showing you on the timeline there a feedback loop to be able to help the user understand where the answer lies to be able to explain in the data. So I bring that up because for a question like this, it's really interesting because we can specify things like time ranges and views. We could have asked where was the robot during that time or what were they doing, and it would produce some of these individual annotations. But we have more annotations we support as well. So we could ask something more interesting or more significant, like when was I near to the robot? When we asked something like that, we developed enough context prompting and context engineering so that we could have the LLM infer what I means and what the robot means, and then map that again to question types that could be answered with specific vises. So here, we didn't spend too much time on the output prompt engineering because you can just kind of write a lot of those really quickly. But the data that would be returned is something like, well, the robot was near to the human at these timestamps, right? And I'm not going to go have to figure out and scrub all that and determine that for myself. Again, just show me and have some sort of visual explanation adapt right away from what the LLM is saying. And so here we see that in the timeline view, we have now individual timestamps, not just a range, which once again helps guide the user to look at which data and at what time to answer this question. And the visual immediately makes it clear the human and the robot were near to each other in that location. And so if we step through the visualization here, we can see they're still next to each other. The data was logged on a sort of 5-second interval. So if you see the kind of break in between, we were measuring at every 5 seconds. But if we move outside of these timestamps, we can see human and the robot are no longer near each other. And then we move back into this region. Now they're next to each other. And then they move out again. And so it's providing a number of opportunities to, again, expand on the way that the system and the AI can help to better communicate some of these data insights that the user is asking about. And finally, this is all nice and neat and nifty and dandy, but it's sometimes really tedious to have to type in exactly what I want. If I'm like, when was the user in like the southwest corner near this object and tree? And you know what, wouldn't it just be easier if I could click on the viz and then ask, when was I near to here? And then have that contextual input, which we capture down here, be automatically fed to the LLM to focus its answer. And so when we do show me, we have the ability to also do bidirectional communication, where you can have the user then specify where or when in the vises that they want to be able to interact with the data, and then ask questions specifically like, again, when was I in this region? And as we scrub through here, we can see that the user's in this highlighted region near where we clicked. And if we move out of there, they're no longer there. And with the visual trace and the spatial view, we can see over time that it remains true. They no longer revisit that area. And so all these are showing different ways that we try to develop a first pass, a prototype really, of what a vision of this more collaborative human AI communication could look like in visualization dashboards. Yeah.
When did you and the LLM really have to anticipate what our queries to support?
We did, yes. And so this was a very user-driven research prototype where we would specifically ask the folks that we knew would use this, the operators, what questions do you want to ask? Then we highly targeted those and said, let's figure out which visualizations and which answers we'd like to be able to support by fetching data. Ordering of operations for a research project, we usually see as a great way to start from best practices to then develop a more generalized approach and to be inspirational kind of, to say like, there's a number of ways we could take something like this and expand on it from there. Starting from, all right, this is what these folks that would use this is exactly what they want to do with the tool. Yeah. So does that help answer the
Oh,
question?
yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't understand why LLM is necessary is like helpful here. But from my understanding, if we know what kind of queries we want,
Mhm.
it's much easier to just extract that from the data directly, right?
Yes.
So how does LLM?
Yeah. There's a number of things there. First, operators are not necessarily data people. They're not used to working with spreadsheets and analysis tools and stuff. So when we talk with these operators, those that have to do this task of reviewing, they first wanted a more natural language approach to doing this. Second, when they do that, we find that they often will prompt an LLM with odd questions and open-ended sort of like phrasing, things like, I could write, when was I near to here, but that could be rephrased in a number of different ways. And so the LLM is actually kind of nice to be able to like interpret a lot of those different phrasings and then be like, all right, this is probably what the user was asking for. Made the user experience a little nicer for them. And then third, well, and so there's another reason as well. The other benefit is this bit here. And then what I'm going to show you guys on how we actually enabled this, being able to infer the parameters needed to fetch the data. So when we ask like, when was I near to the robot, that we're hoping is a flexible enough query that we can expand on making it generalized to different data structures and types. And we're looking at the way that something like an LLM or an AI agent in general can interpret that on behalf of the user and make it more flexible, right? And I'll show you exactly kind of where we're exploring that and under the hood next. But there's a number of things that I think LLMs are good at that I think could help with here. Does that answer your question?
It does. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thanks. To make sure we're keeping right along here, I will switch back over to the slides and we will discuss what I did to enable this tool, how we actually managed to make it happen. So let me share my screen here. So the folks in the room can see it, and on Zoom, I have to share my screen. All right. So, yeah, how did we manage to accomplish this? Time for a live demo. So we used LLM tool calling. It's this nifty little thing that's been out recently, somewhat recently. But it's essentially writing these deterministic functions. Like you could be in Python, write a function. And then instead of asking your LLM to simply just answer a question with whatever context you've given it or whatever data it's been trained on, you first ask it, do I need to call a tool in order to answer this question? And it's provided context through the doc strings we write and the name of the function. And so this is a bit of planning. This is that like magic and mystery of how LLMs do this, very cutting edge there, which we won't dive in too much to today. But we said if that's a possible capability, that's interesting because then we can define these functions we want to be able to map to the queries we know users want to answer. And so for example, like this, if the user asked like, where was the human between minutes 1 and 3? We're hoping that the LLM can interpret that request and then return the appropriate function to call, which would be something like, get the locations at these times from your spatial data with the human argument, the 60 seconds argument, and the 180 seconds argument. We saw a little bit of that when we were demoing the tool about being able to infer the parameters that we need. And so the magic then, if we're able to do something like that, how do we update the visualizations? As we realized, the magic for this project was to be able to map the tools that we had directly to the views that we developed themselves. And we developed these tools to be able to answer that by fetching the data that would be needed to visualize that data. So as an example, if I'm looking at the spatial view, we generated a number of questions with our operators that they wanted to ask. And for example, if you ask like, when was I in the middle of the map? We then created one of these LLM functions, get times at location, which return the data that's already being used to visualize. And then that way we can immediately then generate it as annotations and immediately overlay it with the same structure. And so it keeps it consistent and makes it scalable to be able to operate on a number of these different views. Once we have the data structure, we just have to write the right function. And there's a number of really cool ways you could probably think of already to expand on that, having LLMs generate their own functions and having flexible definitions. For our purposes for the summer, we managed to get a couple working that we knew that the Lincoln Lab folks were really highly excited about because they were very defined by the experts. They knew exactly how these functions would run, and they were comfortable and confident with that. They knew that the answer would be explainable because they knew they could define parameters like what does near mean, what does far mean, what is the middle, things like that. And then with bidirectional input, it's as easy as being able to say, well, instead of inferring all the parameters, let the user tell you what the parameters are. And you don't require the user to do that. I think this is one of the coolest bits of where this area is heading, where there's opportunities to offload what the user needs to do, but there's also opportunities to simply add interaction that creates a huge value add. So I can just click on the map and ask, where was I, or when was I near here? That was huge. The operators loved that because it didn't require them to have to figure out all the visits and stuff. It was a very natural interaction. And so it didn't add a lot of cognitive burden to communicating to the LLM. So there's a number of areas that I'd love to expand on in this direction. One of the most obvious ones, can you do more complex queries? We did not prototype it yet, but I think one of the coolest places you could do that in is to be able to break down these more complex queries into base questions that are functions we can run. Something like, where was the robot when I was mining? Could be broken down into a series of questions. Well, when was I mining stone? We have a function for that. So it returns time. That's not the data we need yet. But where was the robot during this time? That does return the data that we need. And so we could probably explore something like these new agentic planning LLMs to be able to break down these questions, build up the answer, and then each of the data that's returned for each of these answers can then be visualized as those annotations. And it creates a multi-view explainability aspect of it, which I think is really cool. And then as we develop a longer conversation, things like when you saw OnGoal before with the chat history, it starts to get long, lengthy. How do we visualize the different requests that are being asked about and resolve the ambiguity of, well, which of these questions were broken down and how did it answer each of them? And again, with this ambiguity, if we start to scale the different data points we have, like let's say we have a number of more than just 2 agents in the scene, something like that raises an interesting question about ambiguity, how it resolves contextual queries from the user, which are often things that humans like to ask. So when you say this or that, which robot are you referring to? Which human? So interesting questions to be able to explore in the future. And so are we making progress on the best of both worlds? Going back to our model, I think the Debrief tool is realizing a few new techniques for better human AI collaboration and communication, because it's establishing ways to interact with the same data that the human and the AI both have access to. And so this is helping them co-create a shared representation of the data, enabling the AI to guide the human to the relevant data they need to look at, and then allowing the human to generate better explanations of that data. All right, so that was the first aspect of communication. And then second, I want to explore issues of agency. So now, which tasks should humans do and which tasks should AI do? And to explore those questions, we're going to talk about a second tool that I built called VisPile. And so VisPile was the result of a design study we did with US intelligence community analysts and program managers. And so our goal was to explore ways to integrate AI technologies, namely LLMs and knowledge graphs, into unstructured text analysis. Now, a few years back, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released a white paper calling for AI solutions to solve unprecedented scales of data challenges in intelligence. And when you boil it all away, the main challenge is the perennial issue they've always had. Intelligence folks that are analyzing things like I need to go find the bad guy, they have to read a lot of news reports and a lot of text data, and it's way too much, and they can't do it all in one day. And so can they use AI to summarize and extract the relevant things to help the analyst? They've been looking for solutions in this area for a long time. And surprise, surprise, LLMs, as it turns out, are pretty good at summarizing, explaining, and answering questions about text, right? And they're only getting better. But there's also new data structures we're seeing. These things like knowledge graphs are emerging. And they're really simple. They're just graphs that encode relationships between entities as nodes and links. Like the Mona Lisa is in the Louvre, or like John likes Sally, right? And we just encode it as a node and an edge and a node in a graph structure, right? Now, LLMs are pretty good at extracting a lot of this information and potentially taking unstructured text and turning it into a structured representation like a knowledge graph. So there's an interesting potential for synergy in this space. But the issue is we have no idea when and how is the best place to be able to put these technologies into visual analytics tools. And as an example, if you could imagine Tableau powered with LLMs and knowledge graphs, they're already trying to do this. Where should we put them? How should they support users? And when should users be reaching for these tools? And then when should they be doing the analysis themselves? For folks like intelligence analysts that we worked with, this is critical because their jobs rely on it. It's an issue of security. And so to address this, I like to start in a lot of my research by going back to established practices. What do these domain experts do already that we can draw inspiration from? One of the most common sense-making tasks that's been around for a very long time, very well studied, is called piling, information foraging, where analysts will go in and have a series of unstructured information, could be documents or post-it notes or whatever have you. They take that information and turn it into piles. They'll organize it, usually even spatially, to leverage distributed cognition in spaces like your table or the wall, and create these topical piles of information, and then exploit them, read them, take notes, compare the notes between the piles to sort of get a lay of the land and to understand what's going on. So we thought, wouldn't it be really awesome if we could integrate AI technologies into finding these relevant documents to pile, to analyze what's in the pile, and then to validate whatever information came out of your analysis of the pile. And so to accomplish a workflow like this, we needed data. And so in this project, we started with plain text documents. You could imagine taking like a New York Times article, stripping out and the text, and considering just a large collection of news articles or text documents. So we wanted to do a few things first to process the data, your classic document topic modeling with things like extracting metadata with LLMs, or actually using LLMs to do this like open-ended topic modeling. It was kind of fun to experiment with letting the LLM just generate topics without needing to predefine them, and to see just kind of how well they perform and if they kind of align with analysts' understanding and thinking, which then results in documents that can be grouped into piles by like date or time or by topic. Then we wanted to explore, could we make the knowledge graph out of the documents, turn unstructured text into structured text? And so we also employed an LLM to first extract triples, the like entity, relationship entity, John like Sally, pull those out of the text. And then when we have a number of them, we keep track of which document it came from. And then we try to deduplicate, where we say, all right, John likes Sally and John loves Sally. To the best of our ability, are those the same information, same fact, right? And so we have a number of operations to perform semantic deduplication. And when they get grouped, you then have a knowledge graph resulting in these triples, which then have a number of these documents stored for where the facts came from. And an interesting aspect of the data popped out. The analysts saw that and they said, that's interesting. When I see a fact, and if it comes from like 50 different documents, that might be an interesting signal of trust or uncertainty in how true this data is. But if I only see it come from one document, I might be wary of trusting that information. So even in trying to generate structured data, we saw an interesting ability for analysts to kind of take some information we weren't expecting to have there, which was really cool. Then if we have information, like we have data sets of documents with this metadata and a knowledge graph, we wanted to create automated sense-making tasks, things that analysts would do to perform this piling operation that we could automate and provide as potential operations for them to perform. So the first one here is this document-based search, which is really just essentially RAG. You take your documents, turn them into a vector, a numerical string of numbers, and compare those strings of numbers with cosine similarity. Whichever documents are the most related should have the similar numbers, and then we rank them and say, you've asked about some query on a question or a task, and these documents seem to be, in our embedding space, very similar. So here you go, check these out. It's simple, but it's really interesting because analysts didn't have ready access to these operations before, and we're very wary of them. They're used to like keyword search. It says the word and it's in the document, so I know it's true. When it's unstructured and a little uncertain here, they get a little wary. So we wanted to explore how do they use RAG, or if they even use RAG. And second, when we have piles of documents, we want to be able to have an algorithm that can take the documents, take these tasks that analysts perform. They might be extract out a number of entities, classify the topics, explain concepts, answer questions, summarize the file, turn them into prompts, put your documents into those prompts, run your LLM, and then we want to visualize aspects of what the LLM returned for the analyst to understand the response to the task being run. And all of that then gets put into an interface that we called VisPile, which has a number of different ways we saw the analysts use it, but the one we envisioned was actually pretty simple. Start by looking for documents. You could do keyword search, you could do metadata search, semantic search, or even look in the knowledge graph for facts first, and then take those documents that are associated with the facts. Once you have a number of them, drag your documents into piles, pick an LLM and a task, one of those prompts to run it, let the LLM generate a response, read it, and then continue to create piles, make new ones, copy, arrange, filter them, and to continue with a classic operation they're very used to, which is organizing and creating piles of documents. And so let's see VisPile in action. I think that'll be pretty cool. So let me share my screen here. I'm going to duplicate, share, and go back to VisPile. Now, the Debrief tool is an ongoing tool that we are currently working on submissions for and all this stuff. So unfortunately, it's not available on my website, but VisPile is live demo that you can go and play with yourself if you want to on my website. I'm working with a master's student where we're really excited to try to open source that pipeline that I said for extracting your document data and turning it into the format you need, which then would make this really great because then folks could upload their own documents and use VisPile, which would be really cool. So keep an eye out for that. But we first loaded as an example with a proxy intelligence data set, which is used very widely in studying these intelligence scenarios. And it's a data set we know about. There's been this kidnapping, there's crime and stuff going on. We're not really sure. So I do know something about the data. So for the purposes of the demo today, I might start by saying, all right, well, I know there's been a kidnapping. So let's see if reports mention missing persons. And instead of doing keyword, we start already by saying, let's just align it by similarity again. It's open-ended. Does this document have any relation to the topic of missing persons? And then we rank them based on similarity. And so we have a tooltip which could explain these, but again, it's VisPile. Let's let the AI do it. How about we just drag them into a pile? And then instead of reading them, let's just have the LLM perform the task I normally would as if I was an analyst, right? I'm going to have it just analyze the documents. And that prompt we use is available. You can see all the prompts that we generated for these tasks to automate. And it's again, pretty simple, but on purpose, so that analysts have a chance to wrap their head around it and to be like, well, what exactly is happening under the hood? And they can then map it and kind of understand a little better. So it's a prompt that is, here's multiple documents, analyze them as if you're an intelligence analyst and cite your results. Well, let's see how well GPT 3.5 does. This project was done, you can tell, was done a little bit ago. And I haven't updated the models yet, but we could add in your 5 or your local models, your llamas and what have you. But it returns a response right away. And I've analyzed multiple documents to gather information about a situation involving missing individuals. Now, again, it didn't have any access to the similarity search. We just gave it the documents in the prompt. So it might be doing a good job. Maybe the documents are about missing individuals. We could go read them, but again, I don't want to. I want to rely on the AI to perform these operations for me. So instead of reading the documents, we also provide in our piles a number of operations to validate the AI generated results. And so the first one you can do is to extract out knowledge graph entities that we, again, have already pre-extracted during that pipeline phase. And we just label them. So for example, I could be interested in like, there's facts about these 14 individuals. Let me go see what's going on in there. And so gas tech employees disappeared, 14. It's not that interesting. Let's see if we can do like maybe gas tech. Let's read something about gas tech here. Yeah, interesting. Okay, there's more facts about gas tech here. When we click on that, we simply just go back and query our knowledge graph for related entities and facts to that entity. And so it's interesting. Officials, credit for removal is taken against gas tech. Gas tech evacuates sheets, has telephone numbers founded by. Interesting. I might want to know more about these folks here. I haven't really heard about Hank Fluss and Sten San Jorge. I can go click on the document, again, as a level of explainability here, to go grab the document that's being mentioned there. If that's potentially interesting, throw it into my pile. and then to continue the analysis. So we were exploring different ways to sort of bring the knowledge graph data into the analysis as a level of driving the agency in the human loop of doing the analysis, but also as a level of explainability over the LLM's response. So yeah, like I could drag this into my pile and continue analyzing it. So we can extract entities, could also link sentences from the LLM response to the documents. And so we color these sentences by each of the documents, orange, green, red, purple here. And if I click on them, we do a bidirectional mapping here. And it's as simple as sentence-wise comparison. Very similar to the documents, we take every sentence, compare it to every other sentence in the document, and then whichever ones have the highest similarity, we just map those and we say, we're not really sure if that's why the LLM generated its response, but this is a potentially related piece of information. You might want to go read that. And so there, to this point, in case of under investigation, more information was freed as facts are learned. Investigation seems to be ongoing. Potentially the LLM is pulling some of these things it's generating from the documents. And analysts, I mean, they loved this capability because for them, it was easy to visualize and to see exactly where some of this information might be generated from, and they can apply their human judgment and intuition to analyzing them. And then finally, if I want more data on this topic that the LLM's talking about, hitting suggest then takes the LLM's response, compares it to my document space, again through RAG basically, and says, find me documents that are related to what the LLM's talking about. And so if these are not already in my pile, maybe we missed them on our first pass or we want more information, we can go in and click on them. And some of them seem to be talking about the disappearance of employees. There's 14 individuals unaccounted for. And so they're related to the topic that we're exploring there. And so VisPile enables this open-ended exploration where we, again, have the ability for analysts to choose to use these AI operations in any number of ways so that we can explore which ones do they reach for, which ones work well, which ones don't. And when we studied this with the analysts, it was very interesting. We saw a number of really, really cool workflows emerge. Some of them loved to make big piles and then have the AI support them in filtering the pile. All right, it summarized it for me. Now let me remove some documents, summarize again, remove documents and filter. Half the analysts did the exact opposite thing. They only put a few documents in at a time, generated an answer, added more, generated, added more. Some of them would do one task only. I only want to trust it for summarizing. Some of them would actually use the AI in unexpected ways. We actually have the ability to custom prompt it as well. So you can ask it anything you want. And some of them were really interesting. Like some users would generate questions, have the LM automatically generate questions, have it answer those same questions, have it summarize the answer, and then explain any concepts that the user didn't know. And they wanted to chain them in these sort of what is now emerging today is called this agentic space of these operations you can chain together. They were doing them themselves because the interface could afford the ability to do so. And so again, as a project, I was really interested in understanding how is it that humans and AI are taking agency in each of the operations where the human should be summarizing and then when should the AI be summarizing and how that affects analysis. Yeah.
The high-level user experience feels really similar to the LM.
It is.
School.
Mm-hmm.
So we have done a person to the two post concept. We have thought about how the AI human dynamic is not about process.
Yes, no, it's a very good question about the comparison with Notebook LM. And we were noticing that we did this project before that came out. Then it came out. Our first comparison was simply just to like your ChatGPT interface. That one we did run to compare where the usability of that breaks down. Like first to check, does it generate the same information? Like what's the benefit almost quantitatively or practically the actual insights? Is it hallucinating? Is the data correct? We did look at that. And what was interesting was that it had just similar baseline performance to any old interface you could have, your GPT or whatever. Where analysts were struggling was then in like, I ask a question, then I have given it a number of source documents to reference. Then I want to ask a follow-up, but I only want to reference these documents, but I don't want to include the rest of them. It was really difficult for users in the GPT chat interface example to tell the LLM to not pay attention to something and pay attention to something else. Whereas in a VisPile, it was easy for them to simply just remove it from the pile or to split it and break it out into a new line of analysis very quickly. that was one thing that definitely changed the actual data that came out. Because then you would ask it, like, again, ignore this document, but it was really bad at following instructions. I imagine if we compare this to a notebook LLM, there could be similar pain points, which could be a great, honestly, synergy to find here of the really cool capabilities they already have, and then where we can find ways, again, to push at this boundary of agency. How can we give the AI certain information? How can we help the user know that's the information it's acting on, and to be able to organize that information and leave that as a human task rather than entirely driven by, let's say, the LLM deciding which information it needs? There's pros and cons. I would love to keep exploring that space and to answer these fundamental questions more. Yeah. Does that help answer your question? Yeah, it was a great one. All right, as we're moving along time here, I want to get to the end, right? I want to show you guys some cool demos. So there's only a few more things to go here in this space. So I want to wrap up with some of my thoughts on where we go next in this space of human AI collaboration for data analysis. Now for VisPile, I'll say there's two really interesting follow-ups here. Immediately, we realized there's so much more opportunity to combine the data of the knowledge graph with the LLM. We left that as like a sort of human task to go find knowledge graph information, but could we put the knowledge graph facts into the LLM search, chain the results of LLM tasks, or extract out not just entities, but relationships as well, and then surface these questions that the knowledge graph could answer rather than just needing the LLM? And then again, this agentic thing keeps popping up. And I simply, again, just think of it as where can we use AI to mimic some of these things that humans like to operate on, and so it can reduce that cognitive burden of them needing to perform these operations themselves multiple times. So can we have users define multiple analysis steps in sequence? Like we saw the one guy that would do generating questions, answering them, summarizing. Can we make like a template for that? Or having multiple LLMs to analyze competing hypotheses or to play devil's advocate with each other. Maybe asking a Gemini versus GPT, what do you guys think? Is he a bad guy or a good guy? And we see the competing answers. And that might look like comparing piles, having visualizations to compare the text that's being generated between them. And then scaffolding these lines of inquiry around that to say, can I follow up on my investigations in any one of these piles? So they're all really cool directions that I'm hoping to take this area and to build new tools for. And so again, are we achieving this vision of this best of both worlds of human and machine? And I think VisPile is directly exploring where human AI agency can smartly offload these time-consuming tasks to the AI, again, while allowing the human to intervene and guide the AI at all the stages of analysis that they want. All right, and so that was a lot. What did we accomplish today? We talked about communication and agency and human AI collaboration and visual analytics. And so based on what we've seen so far, what would be my one takeaway for you guys? I think if we're working on these human AI data tools, that I believe the AI should be focused first on handling the heavy lifting of finding and summarizing relevant data, then relying on the human's intuition and judgment at these critical decision points, surfacing it for the human to operate on. So that can help, I believe, experts find signal in this noise and then turn these data into insights. And so I'm always looking for future collaborations and opportunities with everybody. If you're interested in this stuff, it's a number of things we've already talked about today. But again, what does this mixed initiative agentic planning look like, where the AI can, again, perform multiple steps of operations that humans do? And if it turns into this multi-branching interaction, what does the interface look like? How do we help users keep track of what they're working on? How do we help the AI keep track of what it's working on? And that turns into goal tracking, how we can extract out what your intentions were and map them to stages of analysis. One area that I didn't get to talk about today that's honestly 50% of my work as well is explainability and visualizing these LLM models under the hood, and actually focusing on what these visualization tools might look like over specific model types. Like I'm seeing these really cool time series LLMs that are starting to pop up, and we're working with time series data. What would a visual analytics tool look like right over top of something like that? And so I want to give a quick shout out to my thesis topic, which is actually trustworthy LLMs in education. And that's where I'm exploring all the aspects of explainable AI and visualizing ML models and interpretability, because we're working with education technology developers, building learning tools, and they're putting AI into them to offload the teacher needing to develop lesson plans, having the AI act as a teaching assistant, or having it actually grade certain assignments or summaries that students wrote. And my whole thesis is on exploring how we can build these visual analytics tools for human-in-the-loop evaluation of ML models and visualize how they're responding, what maybe the attention weights are looking like underneath. So if you're interested in this direction, I would be very happy to also talk about what's going on in that space and visualizing models. And so with that, I am at the end of my PhD, the talk, and I'm also on the job market. So I'm also happy to chat about that stuff. So thanks, guys. Thanks for coming. All right.
Adam,
Any questions?
yes, thank you for the great talk. If anybody has any questions at all, please feel free to ask them now.
Thank you.
And yeah, so yep.
Build a very complicated and smart system to help people using these tools, analyze. But I'm generally interested in knowing, like, how would you teach people to use this complicated system?
Yeah.
There are so many small stuffs there
Yes.
that they would spend a lot of time to discover, or
Yeah.
and I assume you have done a lot of user studies. And
Mhm.
what is your general thoughts about onboarding people who are not so doesn't have such understanding of LM like you, or
Yes.
like a general this kind of AI
Yeah.
community, more other people, maybe undergrads or other people.
Yeah.
How would you onboard it? And what do you think about this balance between the complexity of our system and
Yeah.
this kind of the easiness for users?
Yeah.
I like this to hear.
It's a great question. So we're asking about how I onboard folks that maybe don't know about LLMs or visualizations, and it seems like a complex tool. How do I get them to use it? It's a great question. And I love in my research as many opportunities as I can get to work, again, with experts. That's been my primary target. I like working with people that have a defined workflow, because I find inspiration in taking from the ways that humans already do things, because we're really good at it, and trying to mimic that. And so it's a balance, but I think in like a VisPile, for example, we were saying, well, analysts already know this operation of piling. They have interfaces already about like the drag and drop and moving. That's not too novel of a concept. It's cool to do it again, but we've built tools like that before. So that already solves a little bit of the problem there, where analysts, when we work with them and do user-driven research, human-centered research, we start by asking, how do you normally interact with your data? And we design interventions already towards their existing workflow. Now, you're right. Then we say, well, the LLM is going to handle this, and then they get confused. Half of it is, well, maybe we should think about mitigating this to begin with. Half of it is actually thinking, is that a study opportunity? Like, can we design something intentionally difficult or confusing? Because we're looking to push the boundaries on where certain things may be more intuitive or useful. For VisPile's example, semantic search was one of these operations, which in our day and age, if you're using your Googles and your ChatGPTs or whatever, you're used to like kind of typing ambiguous phrasings and having results returned to you. But again, these analysts, not many of them were entirely confident or understanding of that simple capability of simply just asking for something like a question and just getting a bunch of documents back. That wasn't related to like a keyword search. So there we actually made it a study question. Are they able to understand it? And does that relate to our design or to their understanding of what semantic search is? Takes a lot of work and a lot of, I honestly, I'll call it wisdom to know when to smartly target that. I think when you use novice users as well, to give another perspective, if it's your everyday user or the users that are like anybody that uses ChatGPT, we see a lot of that. That is where I think it's probably more important to focus on like good usability practices, good design, keeping it simpler. Their job doesn't depend on using ChatGPT, maybe, but like analysts, that would depend on using something like VisPile. So we are interested where those pain points emerge that allow us to then target them. And that only happens when we make it intentionally difficult, right? And that's actually been studied as a concept for human computer interaction and designing technologies. So if you're interested in talking about that more, I'd love to chat about those like papers we kind of write on those things. But in general, intentional sometimes. Otherwise, it's depending on, is that a question we want to answer about, do they understand it? And if that matters for us to think about that technology, whether they should be using it or how to redesign it. Yeah.
huge legs.
Yeah, and I love
Yeah.
it. I love getting to do it. I think it's fun. So yeah, there's some folks that like to do that.
Adam, we have a question from David. So David, feel free to ask. We all hear you.
Yeah. Hey there. Yeah, that was great. I'm curious about VisPiles in a couple of ways. One
David,
is
are you there?
I'm trying to be here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can. Okay, good. So my question about VisPiles is, did you have the analysts do similar tasks without VisPiles, sort of with their own piles, and see similar performance? And also, did there, in that comparison, you described some really interesting things about their workflow.
Mm.
Are their workflows basically, they're different among the users? Are they different in VisPiles versus in, I don't know, piles?
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's a fascinating question. We did a lot of studying of the workflow in the formative steps. So our stages of the research started with, all right, analysts, show us what you do with your existing piling interfaces and workflows that you do. We studied them and as a formative aspect. All right, we wanted to know where they drag documents, how they put them into piles, how many documents do they put into a pile, which kinds of them, how do they label them, what operations do they do with them. That we did as a formative step because then that helped us to build the prompts that we had for the sense-making tests. That's how we developed the 9 of them, because they were things we observed analysts doing already. So it was more formative. First, what do they do? Can we mimic that? Then it's a great question about comparison. Okay, well, how does this compare to doing, how does VisPile compare to doing that classic workflow? We didn't run an A/B comparison with existing tools that do piling. And I was explaining this to the other person before. We did it with other LLM interfaces. This was to do more of like the under the hood, like data quality assurance and checking. Like if you're using an interface and having them ask questions like to ChatGPT of the documents, and they like upload those documents as well, are you getting the same insights from those tools that they are starting to use? That was a little more quantitative, and we wanted to understand the quality of the data that came out. But we did observe, like I think I explained before, that there were the pain points that we were excited that VisPile was addressing. Like if you just had an interface like a ChatGPT or a notebook LLM or LM, there was the difficulty we observed with the analysts telling the LLMs which documents to use and which ones to not. And then it would pull in information sometimes that they didn't ask about, and they would get confused. Where with VisPile, we saw analysts trying to mitigate that in really creative ways. Some of them would create big piles. Some of them would create little piles. Some of them would use certain tasks as filter operations. Sometimes they would like suggest documents over and over again until they hit saturation on a whole space, and then analyze those documents all at once. They could, again, so they could do these things in like a notebook LLM or a chat interface. But again, as our formative work showed, it was entirely difficult. And so we tried to address, as a very user-driven design study methodology, can we fix that problem that they have? I think it'd be fascinating to continue to observe if this gets deployed into practice and do like a work observation study, sort of like a diary study or a longitudinal study. Would be really fascinating to surface those insights about how is it actually affecting their performance. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yep, thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Any other questions?
All right, so we are over time. So if anybody has any follow-up questions, can you just go up to Adam and just ask him? And I'm sure he would be more than happy to answer all of your inquiries.
Yep.
So thank you again, Adam. I
Thank you,
appreciate
Brandon.
it. Great talk.
Yeah,
And
thanks everybody online. If you
yeah.
have questions online, email me or get in contact. Happy to chat. All right, thanks everybody. Bye-bye. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Just before, Brandon, should we stop the recording now?
Yeah, you can turn on Zoom now.
Cool.